Well, so there's kind of two things going on in India. At least this is from my kind of looking in very much from the outside that I noticed. One is there's this kind of strong reaction to what was found in the the Fauci emails, so to speak. And the other part, which is really interesting, also is just the response to the second wave of coronavirus, with some people really casting an eye towards China, which is again, maybe not surprising, but interesting how that's being done. But so tell me about these things.
So, if you remember, and before the financial crisis, in the 2008 U.S. financial crisis, the credit default swap issue, that sort of thing, the West had a lot of prestige in terms of financial sectors globally. So you would bring in a New York hedge fund manager if you were in India to advise you, to brief your people, to discuss the international financial system. And then after 2008, when the system started to collapse, there was a total loss of faith in the West being able to lead economically in those areas. What's happening now, especially with the Fauci emails in India, is a very similar crisis of faith and belief in the Western systems, in particular the US and the UK systems, for being honest reporters on issues like gain of function or ivermectin or things like that. So we have, and this is about perception, right? I'm not talking about the science. I'm not qualified to talk about the science, but I can say that from what the Indians are saying, there was a series of investigations done in India, a very interesting paper published very early on, I think in January or February of last year, where they were saying this virus looks manipulated. And in Fauci's emails, he called it outlandish. Now, the Indians are not delighted about that because it destroyed the credibility and the careers of, at least temporarily, of those scientists who now may be proven to be right. So all of these paragons of scientific virtue that India used to look to, the Lancet, for example, and various other things, are now being called into question. So it's a big loss of prestige and soft power on the part of the West at a scale that is similar to the financial crisis, but in the scientific community. So there's the upside to it is that maybe India will start to take its own people more seriously, and they have extremely good scientists. But in terms of sitting in from the point of view of the West, those people, we're not going to be invited to conferences the way we were before. We've proven that we're not reliable or trustworthy in some of the most critical topics of our time.
That's fascinating. I want to also talk about the second wave in a moment, but before I go to that, actually, so what is India's relationship then with the WHO? Because this is one of the, obviously, multilateral institution, central, it's supposed to be helping steward somehow the global health regime as so far as that exists. What is India's relationship with the WHO, and how has that changed?
India, much more so than the US, was a believer in multilateral institutions. So when I would go to India, they would talk to me about Millennium Development Goals and sustainable development, sort of the UN type of terminology that in the West, we actually, honestly, we don't really pay that much attention to. But in India believed in it. Indian bureaucracy believes in it, very engaged in the UN. But there's been such an effective elite capture of the UN by China that these aren't multilateral institutions anymore. They're proxies in many cases of Beijing's interests. And Beijing will put not only its own people in places where it can, but it'll put in place people who it has influence over. And it's very targeted and it's very effective. So India is finding that these institutions that it thought were maybe a little bit dodgy, but the usual bureaucratic dodgy, are actually tools of Chinese political warfare in a way that they hadn't anticipated. And the WHO in particular has become a problem. And this political warfare language is very helpful, because the way China has been using language to cover over its desires and its push is recognized from India, and India is starting to reappropriate the language. So in the case of the WHO, we're starting to hear now, I've heard it a couple of times on Indian television, them referring to WHO as the Wuhan Health Organization, right? So they're using language to reappropriate the narrative in a way that I didn't hear two years ago. So for example, they're not talking about the India-China border, they're talking about the Indo-Tibet border. They're not talking, these are specific cases, but it's starting to gain traction. They're not talking about the South China Sea, they're talking about the ASEAN Sea, right? So, and again, this is this issue. The closer you are to China, the more you see how it operates. And if you're smart, and the Indians are pretty smart, you fight back on the same terms. So I'm learning a lot from India as it adjusts over the last sort of year and a half, especially since the 20 Indian soldiers were murdered by the PLA in the Himalayas, about how you can effectively fight back against the Chinese Communist Party in all of these different sectors.
Hey, thanks for watching American Thought Leaders. As you're probably well aware, big tech has been censoring a lot of content on its platforms, including some American Thought Leaders episodes, including some other Epoch Times content. Now, to deal with this, we've actually launched a new video platform, Epoch TV. Epoch TV is our premium platform for digital video content. It's got American Thought Leaders, it's got Facts Matter with Roman Balmakov, The Larry Elder Show, Crossroads with Joshua Phillip, and frankly, this is our contribution, if you will, to the uncensored media landscape, which is something we really, really need in this country and around the world, frankly. To subscribe, epochtv.com/ATL. Go to epochtv.com/ATL or hit the link below.